Good morning. Welcome to what is now our fourth webinar by Sparrowly Group as part of our Business Bounce Back series. Welcome to today's webinar, Making Your Business Accessible, and thanks for joining us. For those of you that I haven't had the chance to meet in person, my name is Giovanna Lever, and I'll be your presenter today.
And I'm Jackie Hicks, the co-presenter today. We're also joined by Avril on tech support, and we'd also like to welcome our special guest, Marc Tompkins, who will be available during question time. Marc is the Access and Inclusion Officer at Greater Shepparton City Council in Victoria.
How are you guys?
Some housekeeping before we begin. Your video and audio have been disabled for the presentation, and the session will be recorded and sent to you, all those who have registered, in follow-up, as well as going on our Sparrowly Group channels. This includes the presentation slides and resources. We welcome you to revisit the recording yourself and share it with colleagues and watch on demand. If you have any questions, please pop them in the Q&A box, which you can open at the bottom of your Zoom screen, and we will collate them together and go through these at the end of the webinar. If you're having any technical issues, please also use the chat box and we will respond to you directly. Now let's get into today's webinar. This is a really important and big topic, and we may spend 25 minutes getting through the content and then go into the question time. And so that you can fully concentrate on the information to come, we'll turn our video off now.
Just get our video. Oh, wonderful. Excellent. So to set the scene and provide you with some background, both Jackie and myself are the co-authors of an independent discussion paper which we released in 2018 and we update annually, called Creating Real Inclusion, a call to arms to the tourism industry in support of people with disability. We developed the paper initially as I have a family member with a hidden disability, and when travelling domestically and internationally, we found that her needs were highly compromised due to the lack of care and attention given to the needs of people with disability.
Since being released, we've been fortunate enough to continue the discussion about accessibility in the domestic tourism sector of Australia. But most importantly though, is that we've been advocates for the people who need their voice heard, people with disability. So let's get into it. Today we're going to discuss: what does accessibility and accessible business mean? Why it's important to you, and what's the opportunity for you as a business?
What does the accessible customer need? Highlight some examples of businesses and organisations doing it well. And finally, what you can do to be accessible ready. Now, we've only got about 25 or so minutes, but we want to give you an understanding of the key principles and concepts that you need to consider for your business. We'll also share some resources with more detail so that you can keep learning after today's session, including a copy of our Accessible Tourism paper to read. Let's begin by defining what having an accessible business means. It's ensuring businesses and services they provide, infrastructure, public spaces, accommodation, and transport modes are accessible for all, especially for people with disability. Now, what does accessibility mean? It's important to note that the correct reference to a person is to be with disability. And most importantly, a person with disability are not just those who are in wheelchairs.
People with hidden disabilities are those who are often overlooked. Look at these pictures here. You also need to consider people with prams, seniors, carers, people with food intolerances, people with language difficulties, and those who are temporarily affected by disability, for example, someone with a broken hand. Accessibility is broader than structural changes such as ramps and wider aisles. It encompasses a range of things from training your staff on how to accommodate the needs of all people, the font you choose for your website, how you arrange your product, and where you place your signage. Why it's important and what's the opportunity for you? The figure alone should be reason enough. $10.8 billion, and that's just tourism. A study by Travelability found that the value of accessible tourism in 2018 was worth more than that of the inbound Chinese market of 10.4 billion. The spend accounted for 11% of total tourism expenditure and can be broken down into day tripping at 1.4 billion, inbound travel at 2.8 billion, and overnight trips at 6.6 billion.
The study also found that in 2020, the value was forecasted to account for 25% of total tourism spend. Now, a report by Monash University identified that making your business more accessible has the potential to generate more revenue. If your business isn't accessible for all, then you're missing out on significant numbers of potential customers.
But not only is it important from an economic lens. Under the Commonwealth Disability Discrimination Act of 1992, it's illegal to discriminate against people with disability by refusing access to or use of facilities or premises, failing to provide a means of entry, requiring a person to leave a premise or stop using facilities without a reason, refusing to provide goods or services to a person with disability, or providing goods and services in a way that is not accessible.
So within the social model for accessibility, it makes a distinction between impairments, that's the condition, illness or lack of function, and the disability, being barriers and discrimination, contrasting the medical model of disability. Within this context, the environment must change and adapt to enable people living with impairments equal opportunity to participate in society.
So what's the opportunity for you as a business? Beyond people with disabilities, improving this sector will also greatly benefit the seniors market. The seniors market is an important contributor to the visitor economy, and operators need to be aware of accommodating for these visitors. Seniors coming through now are more financially secure than previously by nature of their generation and ready and wanting to spend.
There's a high level of loyalty to be gained from people with disability. This means that they'll repeat their travels to certain places based upon their own experiences and recommend the great places to go to their peers. This is linked to the idea of place attachment and place identity, which is essentially where someone develops such a deep connection and attachment to a place and creates an emotional bond.
So, what does the accessible customer need? It's important to think of accessible customers beyond their mobility and focus on their ability. There is an untapped opportunity for both those people with disability and for businesses.
The current scope for the impact to the visitor economy is already significant, and if the sector was serviced to fully meet their needs, it has the potential to be so much bigger. People with disability don't want to be treated any differently than any other visitor without disability. That is, they want the same as every customer, exceptional customer service and experiences.
In most cases, when travelling or visiting a business, people with disability face a multitude of common barriers which make it difficult, less likely, or even impossible to use and visit a business. Some of these include barriers to the physical environment, such as steps and narrow or congested spaces, barriers to information with text difficult to read or information hard to understand. As well as this is information on publications which are only available in limited formats. For example, someone who is deaf, hard of hearing and hearing impaired may not be able to follow along with a video clip if there are no captions. Also, barriers to communication, with operators providing limited options for people to contact them and lack of awareness about how to communicate effectively. And finally, barriers as a result of discriminatory or negative attitudes.
So let's look at who's doing it well. Accessibility awareness is getting more traction than ever before, with each state and territory mandated under the Disability Services Act to develop a disability inclusion plan. Now, whilst this is a tremendous step forward, key to this is to ensure that these plans are consistently implemented to ensure people with disability have continued access to improved services and experiences to enable the quality of life that they deserve. From an accessible tourism perspective, Whilst Australia has a long way to go, our research for the discussion paper has uncovered a number of destinations, events, experiences and attractions that have had a positive impact on the customer experience for people with disability.
One example of this are the efforts when national parks across several states have introduced trailer riders, creating access into most national parks. It allows the person with disability to ride anywhere that is marked out as a walking track. The single wheel of the trailer rider can weave its way amongst the obstacles on a typical mountain track, whilst 1 to 2 people guide and push the trailer rider. Specifically, Parks Victoria's commitment to accessibility have been recognised at Victorian Tourism Awards in the past. Other key initiatives implemented in Victoria to increase accessibility include welcome information for children on the autism spectrum, customised canoe launches, a dementia sensory trail, hoists to improve boat access from piers and jetties, and a range of accessible accommodation.
Another example we'd like to highlight is that of the Sydney Harbour, who is setting the benchmark for access and inclusion at major events and precincts. Following the installation of lifts at the northern and southern ends of the Harbour Bridge, the lifts can now take 27 people or 2 wheelchairs and 2 carers. At the Sydney Opera House, accessibility has been a focus in the past decade, with accessibility strategies and strategic plans focusing on improving access in the building, performance and experiences, workplace operations and community services, and community leadership. Services at the Opera House include Auslan interpreted shows, relaxed performances, captions and subtitles, hearing loop, audio described and touch shows, accessible tours and programs in partnership with Vivid, Australian Ballet and Dancing with Parkinson's. I just want to add here a little bit of a story if I can, just, throwing off script, but a couple of years ago I was at the Sydney Opera House watching my son perform at primary proms, and it was intermission and I was standing behind a lady and she turned around and we started chatting, and I thought to myself, I think she's lip reading me, and anyway she started welling up with tears and I said, are you okay? And she said this is the first time since she'd had an accident that left her with a hearing impairment that she had been back at the Sydney Opera House, and thanks to Hearing Loop was able to hear her daughter perform. It was just the most touching moment, and it was great that she was able to experience that. A final element here around Sydney Harbour is around Vivid and Sydney's award-winning festival. They're continually setting the benchmark for access and inclusion at major events with facilities and programs offered, including accessible viewing platforms, audio descriptions, interactive guest experiences and text-to-talk services. Now, of course, Vivid hasn't been able to go ahead this year due to COVID, but this is absolutely their focus and continues to be.
There are a number of not-for-profit organisations across a number of industries which are accommodating and servicing the accessible industry through training, guidance, reviews and grants. These organisations aim to remove the stigma within society and the environment addressing the social model of disability. One of these include Briometrics, who are specialists in technology for wheelchair users. The technology produces maps for cities and regions that includes information on footpaths, toilets and change facilities and accessible car parking spaces. The maps indicate the degree of difficulty for mobilising throughout a region, as seen here for a regional city in Victoria, Greater Shepparton, a predominantly flat city. The technology Briometrics uses equips a wheelchair user with an app to measure and record the routes taken along footpaths to determine the surface type and conditions, as well as prepare a report on potential hazards, effort rating and accessible buildings. The maps created are beneficial not only for local residents, including the elderly and parents with prams, local businesses to be aware of and promote, but also visitors to a region.
The final organisation we'd like to highlight is that of Travel Without Limits, a disability-specific magazine co-founded by the wonderful Julie Jones, founder of blog Have Wheelchair, Will Travel. Her blog and website provides people with disabilities, their support workers and family members with a pool of accessible, friendly places to experience, visit and stay. We absolutely love Julie. Her and her family are absolutely beautiful, and her time and attention to this sector has been fantastic. She is held up in high esteem in the tourism industry. We have a subscription and we love this magazine. We find it empowering and so informative, and I often find my daughter when she comes to the office after school reading over it, and I can see that she can relate to many of the articles in there. So for more examples of those initiating change and for positive experiences, when we do send in the follow-up, you can look at our full discussion paper, which will be linked in the resources, but it's also on our Sparrowly.com website.
Now, what can you do to be accessible ready? Firstly, a change in attitude from looking beyond the tick boxing exercise to be compliant to one that's truly customer-centric and commercially minded.
We all need to recognise that the problem is that society puts up barriers for people with disability. It's not the people with disability that are the barrier. In most cases, people with disabilities describe challenges or difficulties experienced by them as attitudinal barriers, which result from someone misunderstanding, confusing, or ignoring their needs. My beautiful neighbour Athena has cerebral palsy and is in a wheelchair, and she's always telling me stories of where this has happened. These misconceptions and attitudes are often the most significant barrier that a person with disability may face when seeking positive and equitable customer experiences. Now, whilst it's unreasonable to expect every staff member to deliver exceptional customer experience in line with every type of disability, any effort or signs that a business has made to make their business more accessible to people with disability can go a long way.
An ideal model of accessible tourism or accessible business would see universal design principles applied for all experiences, products and services, appropriately meeting and adapting to the needs for all people, regardless of their abilities. Before we get into our checklist, let's look at these 5 steps in building an accessible ecosystem, which My Travel Research has prepared. Firstly, consulting is at the foundation of the market. It's important to engage with people with disability and their broader community, as well as staff and operators and local government, at a starting point to determine exactly what is necessary for people with disabilities to visit businesses or to travel. The second step is inspiring and educating with service providers and operators across industries and within the destination about the potential of untapping the sector. Depending on size and locale, this could also include working collaboratively with other operators within council and or the destination itself.
The third step is collating and bringing together service providers and peak bodies to provide and identify key areas of exploration and development. It's recommended that businesses start small and develop as you grow where necessary. It's important to understand exactly what you're trying to achieve and for who. And it's not recommended to announce that a business is accessible if it only meets minimal needs.
The fourth step is the promotion to get the right message across to customers and people with disability. This includes ensuring that websites and social media are easy to read and use, and highlighting each service that's being offered. The final step is building new or renovating existing infrastructure. Importantly, consulting with specialist design providers, architects, or interior designers to incorporate universal design principles to optimize design efficiency.
All right, now let's look closely to the checklist, which has been developed to help you review the accessibility of your business and identify changes you can make to improve access for existing and new customers with disability and mobility issues. So as you can see, it's quite small on the slide. Don't worry, this is all coming in your resource kit following this webinar.
The self-assessment checklist should act as a guide. We recommend using the checklist in conjunction with gaining feedback from your customers to enable continual small but impactful improvements.
So first, let's look at how accessible your business is in terms of the surrounding, signage, access, interior, amenities and procedures. So some things you may want to consider. And again, don't worry about writing this down because you'll get all the notes as well. Are there any permanent and non-permanent infrastructure elements which may be blocking the footway? For example, A-frame boards. Are there any designated accessible parking spots close by? Is there clear and easy to read signage to identify your business from the street? If there are steps to enter your business, do they have a good surface in that they're non-slip and in good condition, have adequate lighting and contrasting step edges? Internally, are there wide and clear walkways? Is there clear space between furniture and stands for a person to manoeuvre around? Are the wall colours neutral with colour contrasting door frames and window trims? This is especially important for people who are visually impaired and people who are colourblind. What amenities are available either in your business or close by? And by this we mean accessible bathroom facilities and paper change areas.
Now we'll look at your experience and how accessible that is in terms of your staffing and customer experience. Some things you might want to think about. Are there feedback forms or alternative ways in which you're able to obtain feedback, whether it be in person, by phone, or by email? Does your staff receive customer service training, including disability awareness? Are your staff available and prepared to service and attend to customer needs, which may include speaking clearly, writing information down, and interpreting gestures, expressions, and messages? Finally, let's look at how accessible your communications are. Here we'll be looking at your marketing and communications and thinking about your website first. Is your information in clear language and easy to read? Do you provide all useful and accurate information about your business and facilities? If you do have accessible features in your building, is that clear enough and do you provide any images? Are there simple directions to your business? Does your website and social media accounts provide clear business information, your address, phone number, and opening hours? And finally, do you provide alternative ways to communicate with your customers visibly or audibly?
So making your business accessible friendly may seem daunting or sound expensive. This shouldn't be the case.
Here are some ideas of some things that you can take action with today in regards to your business. Have a look at your business and consider yourself in a person with disabilities position. Could they access your building or navigate their way around? What distractions are there in your building? Limiting noise and having adequate lighting is really important.
Most importantly, and we love this, something that you can do today, even right now, is get educated. Speak to someone with disability and start learning.
Absolutely. Another important thing you can do is have a look at your website and make sure your communication is clear and easy to understand. We hosted a webinar several weeks ago on the Australian Tourism Data Warehouse. And if you have a listing or are looking to create one as a tourism operator, it's really important to include all the accessible features you have in your business. Avril will pop the link to the recording and the tools to that webinar now in the chat box so you can go back and watch it. Otherwise, don't hesitate to reach out to us for more information if you miss the link. We'll be sure to share our contact details at the end.
All right, to wrap up, you'll receive the checklist so that you can do a self-assessment on your business. This checklist will help you understand the areas where you're providing good access and areas that require access improvement.
You can take these areas which require improvement and group them into the following areas. Those actions which you can take now for little or no cost. Those you can take in the medium term that don't require renovation to your building, but may include some costs. There will also be long-term projects which will require significant investment into a redevelopment or renovation for improvements.
So in summary, ignorance is not an excuse. to not pay attention to this important sector as a customer and making efforts towards accommodating their needs, you're not only doing a great disservice to people with disability, you're doing a great disservice to your business and missing out on a loyal customer base who, with the right care and attention, want to spend money with your business. So tomorrow morning, we'll be sending a follow-up email to you all with the related materials so that you can take these learnings and apply them to your business. This includes a recording of this webinar, presentation slides, link to our discussion paper, and the checklist so that you can do a self-assessment on your business.
Feel free to forward that email to other business owners you think will benefit from this information, and please watch the video again. Now let's get on to the questions, and again we'd like to introduce Marc Tompkins from Greater Shepparton City Council to assist in answering anything. Avril, have we got anything?
We might put our video back up.
Yeah, thanks guys. Let me include my video as well. We do have a couple of questions. So one from Ian, would it be a good idea to register as an NDIS supplier for our business? Do you guys want to shoot?
Great, Marc, I'm going to flick over to you and get some in the hot seat.
My understanding of the NDIS supplier situation is if your business supplies services that are directly related to people with barriers, so you might be a cleaning service or a provider of personal care, then absolutely yes, it's worth registering. But I haven't seen anything regarding the NDIS being able to register an accessible business like a cafe, a shop, or a accommodation. And with the exception to the accommodation is if you are a registered provider of respite care. But generally speaking, being an accessible business is separate to the NDIS, as I understand it.
Great, thanks.
Thank you, Marc. And I've just got a couple of other questions. You know, we do hear from people that they might not own their retail space or their shop, and how could they go about becoming an accessible business if they've got a cafe or a retail space or a physical store?
Sure. I might kick off and then hand over to you, Marc, to finish this off. So there are some elements that you can do within your control of having the building and leasing that building. And our checklist will certainly help around that. And then there's the broader piece around how you work with your landlord in terms of the elements of the building that the landlord owns and their responsibility. Marc, do you care to add to this in terms of your background?
Yeah, I'll add a little bit, and Genevieve sort of touched on it a second ago when she was talking about having to work with your landlord. And unfortunately, that's where it gets a little bit, it can get a little bit tricky because the shop owner may have the desire to become accessible, but they've rented a shop that is not accessible. And unfortunately, under the building codes Australia-wide, it is up to the landlord to keep the premises in a standard that would meet the access standards. So any building or works that have to take place to make a shop accessible have to be done within the confines of that shop's tenancy, and are generally done at the expense of the landlord, or very occasionally you have the shop owner who understands the benefits of having an accessible shop. As Genevieve said earlier, it does, sorry, Giovanna, I should say.
I get you all the time.
Sorry. But as was outlined earlier, there is money to be made by being accessible. So some shop owners I've come across have, even though they're leasing the space, they've taken it upon themselves to bear the costs of those upgrades.
That's right, and I've seen this also. You know, you can put the temporary ramps in, for instance, that you bring in and out.
Correct. The issue with the temporary ramps is that they are exactly that. They are temporary and they have to be taken in and out each time a customer who requires them wants to go in and out. It's technically illegal to have them left out on the footpath all the time. So they have. So yeah, it's
Of course, but it's an alternative and a step forward. But as Marc said,
correct.
and as we've said in the webinar, there is a revenue opportunity here. So it's about a cost benefit, as a tenant in terms of whether you're willing to invest in some of those infrastructure changes as well. Thanks, Marc. Any other questions, Ab?
Yeah, so just to call out from Yasmin as well that you can register your business as an accessible business with Aboutable. And that is getaboutable.com. We'll also, that's in the chat now if you want to get that URL. But yes, that's a really great initiative as well to look at. Sorry, go ahead. Oh, hi, Yasmin. Great. And then there's one other from Hansi, and it's, is there any options for small country communities to band together with council to make their communities more accessible, as not all old buildings are able to be adapted, especially old heritage buildings that run into conflict with building codes?
Yeah. Okay, so I might kick off and then I'll pass over to you, Marc. Marc, obviously, he is Accessibility Inclusion Officer at Greater Shepparton City Council in Victoria, but wears many hats. He's a great advocate for people with disability and inclusion. But in terms of working with your council, this is about relationships. This is not about councils putting up, the hand around. It's about building a relationship and education, which we mentioned earlier, around the importance of this sector and inclusion. Yes, some buildings may be more difficult than others, but there are ways, and there's some great councils across the country, small and large councils who are working towards this. Quite just recently, Wimmera Mallee Tourism came to Jackie and I and asked us to do a similar webinar for their region, which is very small, made up of many small towns in the Wimmera Mallee region in Victoria. So there are a lot of great councils, small and large, who are proactively looking towards what they can do and working with the community. There's some that probably, still need a little bit of a push, but it is a lot about, working in collaboration with council, but also from a community perspective being, proactive as well. Marc, did you have anything you'd like to add?
I'd really just like to reinforce exactly what you said, and it's a collaborative approach with your council to raise awareness of the benefits of accessible businesses. And just touching on the heritage element of access for a moment, yes, it can be more complicated to make a heritage building accessible, but it's by no means impossible to do. In fact, I've never actually met a heritage building I couldn't make accessible. It's just a matter of application and spending the time to do it. And yeah, that's basically it. So just because you're in an area that is heavily populated with heritage buildings doesn't mean that being accessible is a pipe dream. It's by no means a pipe dream and can be done. And that's where working with a registered access consultant and council's heritage advisor can basically find a solution to that problem. And surprisingly, it's not always expensive to update a heritage building, because heritage buildings have that stigma of being difficult to work with. In some cases, it's simply people haven't investigated it because they saw it was heritage listed, and that was sort of the roadblock that stopped them. So it's by no means impossible to make a heritage building accessible.
Great.
Thanks,
Great.
Mark. We've got one last question from Ian, and it's consulting regulators. Who would you recommend that we could consult with?
Okay, that is also a Mark question. I'm so glad we brought Mark on.
The short answer is in terms of regulators to look at making buildings accessible, you need an access consultant, and there's a database of accredited access consultants in Australia. I'll happily provide a link to that database for Sparrowly to include in the information packs. But basically, an access consultant is a good place to start, but also the council's municipal building surveyor can generally also give you a fairly good starting point. And in all honesty, I'd start with your local municipal building surveyor, and then once you've got an understanding of what's required to make that building accessible from a planning point of view and a building point of view, it's sort of at that point you could then go and engage the services of a access consultant to basically refine your design, because the access consultants are the guys that have all of the information around how to make a building accessible. Not only will it then meet minimum standards, any design that an access consultant worth their salt will provide will also meet the universal design criteria as well.
Right.
That's fantastic. Thank you so much, Mark. One thing I'd just like to add on that point as well is that in your case, because I know your personal case, it's also worth talking to your customers first as well and asking them, you know, how they find your experience and your product, and getting that first level customer feedback as well. That's also a very useful thing to do. So that's the end of our questions now. I'll hand back over to you ladies to wrap up.
Thank you. Thanks, Mark.
No worries.
Thank you. So here are our contact information details. So please feel free to reach out to Giovanna and myself. And if you want Mark's details, we'll send them through as well. And you'll see our next webinar is on Thursday, August 27th at the same time, 11:30 a.m. on Demystifying Numbers, a Financial 101. And you will receive in the follow-up email tomorrow a link to register for that.
Great. Thanks so much for your time and joining us. We know how precious and important your time is. You're busy business owners. Reach out to us anytime you have any questions. Mark, thank you so much for your time and being part of it today, and wishing you all a great rest of the day. See you in a couple of weeks on the next webinar. Bye.
Thank you.